Thank you for attending. Last year I think I got this session. I think I was the last one, so I'm progressively getting better each year. Maybe next year I might get a day before. Anyway, welcome everyone and thank you for coming along. Just share our experience with the City of Parramatta over the last couple of years, particularly in light of the amalgamations. Some might say that we're probably the most hard done by in terms of challenging a number of contracts and councils that were come to Parramatta in pieces as opposed to a whole council merging with another. So I'll take you through that process of the tender assessment and some of the challenges and opportunities we faced leading up to the actual contract commencement. So here is the City of Parramatta. You can see the pale blue outline is our old one. It was known as the propeller shape. The area to the south at the bottom of the screen was merged with Cumberland, the new Cumberland Council, which was a combination of former Auburn and Holroyd. The area in the grey is our new area, known as Arrowhead or Schnitzel, some people call it, and it's a combination of a number of councils. So we had boundary changes as opposed to complete amalgamations, and that poses a challenge in itself. 5 parts into one. And obviously we had to honour the existing waste contractual obligations that were already in place. So this is what we were dealing with. We had the Clean Away in the Hills area finishing on the 30th September. We had Hornsby Clean Away to the north as well, finishing on the 5th of November. We negotiated that because that aligned with our contract end. Initially they wanted a financial year end, but we negotiated it would be much easier for us if we could align everything on the same date. Holroyd with the same, with the exception of a recycle bin contract, which is still being honoured through JJ Richards until later this year. So they're doing that for a number of dwellings on our behalf still. Auburn came across to us, and then obviously Parramatta had its existing dwellings that we honoured with a Clean Away contract in place. So I think the advantage for having Clean Away in at least 3 of 5 of those meant that there was some consistency around maintaining those services up until the actual handover date. Obviously things didn't go perfect, and I'll talk about some of the lessons at the end around contract finishing, and particularly when you change a contract and a new contract commences. So this is sort of the numbers we had. 29, nearly 30,000 new properties came to us from those councils. We lost about 12,000 to Cumberland, so we had a net gain of about 17,000 properties, 30,000 people. We estimate there's up to 10,000 tonnes more of garbage per annum that's now as a result of that. We have about 80,000 properties that we now service. The population at the moment is around 240,000. It's predicted to go up to about 400,000 by 2036, and as previous speakers have told, most of that is in densifying around transport hubs, and it's all going up. So multi-unit dwellings is certainly a key focus for us at the moment and going forward in the next 10 years at least. Density there is quite dense per square metre, and that will increase with time. So what are the considerations we thought? Here's an opportunity for a new tender to consider what the public want. Let's go out and do some consultation. So we used a combination of workshops and focus groups facilitated by an independent expert. We used our own research and consultation team internally to do some survey. We have like a citizens panel of 3,000 residents who voluntarily are demographically representative of our local government area, and they can be consulted on a number of different matters and issues. So we went out to them with a detailed survey, and we asked them about a number of different things. Basically, are you satisfied with the current services? What would you like to see change? Particularly the people that were coming from the new areas. The example was, what worked for you in that old area? What did you like about the services in the former area? Would you like to see those continued? Did you know that we currently offer this in Parramatta? Would you like to see that opportunity exist into the future? So we made sure that we had representative samples in all of this, so there was some statistical validity in terms of who we were asking the questions of and workshopping with. And we asked them about their feedback, aspirations, We asked them about the bin combinations and sizes, because that was different across all councils. We had one council with a 2-bin system, one with a 3 with a smaller 120 instead of a 140. We had different arrangements for cleanups. Some were scheduled, some were pre-booked. We're in a position where we had a hybrid system as a trial in transitioning to pre-booked, and I can talk about that more later. We also talked about non-core services. Do you like things like a problem waste collection or a household asbestos collection, e-waste? And what educational things would you like to continue? How would you like them delivered? What's worked best for you? And certainly we talked about the waste charge, because with every service that you provide, there's got to be a cost. And for us, it was about what is your willingness to pay for these services, and if you want these extra services, what would you be prepared to pay? And we did some exercises around that, giving them fake gold coins and asking them what sort of money would you be prepared to get that level of service. So what were some of the things we certainly had to consider? The housing density and population forecasts. I think a number of speakers over the last few days have talked about this. For us, it was critical, particularly not just the CBD, but in the new areas we inherited, the areas of Carlingford, Epping, Sydney Olympic Park, Wentworth Point. Those areas are going ahead so rapidly. And then we've got other precincts like Westmead, Talopia, Camellia, the Parramatta Road corridor, where these precincts are being master planned on a grand scale for complete upzoning. So those sorts of things in the future are certainly going to be critical for us. For example, in the last 6 months, we've had probably 30 requests for pre-occupation certificates, and that meant nearly 2,000 units in the last 6 months that we've had to cater for. And most of those are multi-unit dwellings with large shared bin arrangements. And these are ones that have mostly come from other councils, so we didn't actually condition or approve them. We just had to accept what was there and then negotiate, obviously, those around those arrangements. And there's expected to be about another 5,000 units over the next 2 years that we have to deal with, most of those multi-unit dwellings. We did some benchmarking. Before we even looked at the tender, we said, well, how about we look at what everyone else is doing around us? Now, this is back in 2016. We looked at things like bins, sizes, clean-up arrangements, extra services like, did you provide a curbside mulching service or a problem waste service? Was it mobile or drop-off? And I mentioned things before like e-waste or medical waste, things like chemists having sharp containers that we arranged collection for. And do you offer a commercial service? So understanding what people had are joining us and saying, well, what sort of cost are they charging for that service? And again, is it something we want to continue with or add or take away that service? Certainly we had to consider the targets. Obviously the New South Wales government set a target for diversion from landfill. It's also set some targets around litter. Our environmental sustainability strategy recently has set three of those. One, as you can see at the bottom, number 3, aligns with the state target. Our diversion from landfill, we're aiming for 85% by 2038. Last year we got around just over 70, I think it's 72% diversion at the moment. And we also looked at a consumption target. We wanted to know that what are people actually doing in terms of consumption? Let's think about avoiding the waste in the first place, getting people to reduce how much waste they're generating. Now that's going to be a tricky one because it involves quite a lot more effort, but it was something that we had to aspire to, and so they're our 3 key targets or objectives into the future. So as I said, number of types of work services, the tonnages, the data quality, all of that stuff is important to put into the tender. We had to provide the tender briefing as much as we could, the most accurate information, and in some cases the existing contracts were already in place, so our tipping or processing of the red bin was in place, as was the curbside cleanup receipt and processing. So this contract was quite specific. I'll take you through what we actually tendered for in a moment, but one thing I wanted to stress was you need to have a really good procurement team that has tender systems and processes in place. Luckily for us, this has been set up about 3 years ago, and we have an intranet that has detailed, legally backed and checked, and a procurement team that is very helpful in terms of running the whole tender process. So there's independence and there's integrity in the process, but there's also a number of documents that guide the staff within the council. So things like an evaluation plan template for your tender, a checklist, They have their own tender template. I'll go on in a moment and talk about why we used the industry model one for consistency. But things like tender adverts, site inspection or meeting pre-meetings with some of the tenderers. And then there's things like the assessment process, score sheets, recommendation reports and letters. So all of that's there as templates. It really makes the process a lot easier for staff if you have a consistent approach that has some integrity and quality behind it. So the template format we used pretty much followed that's available through the model documentation, which was last updated in 2015, and for us that wasn't long before we actually went out in 2016. So everyone's quite familiar with the information generally, the conditions around the tendering, the draft contract, which was quite specific, and we followed that to a T with the model. The other ones, Part D, E and AB, we used the base one, but we did tend to change some things and modify it to suit Council's own specific requirements or the way that we wanted to project to get the message across. So basically did follow the model conditions. Now, the reason we did that was that the industry knows that they're familiar with it, and it certainly makes the process more familiar with them in terms of them preparing a reputable response. So this is what we went for. We went for a 5+1+1. We certainly looked at conformity and non-conforming tenders. We did agree that we would accept non-conforming tenders as long as they were submitted with a conforming one. We went for collection of those different streams. And we also said that we would include processing of the later two, meaning garden and recycling, or we would do collection only. We consider collection by itself, or we'd also consider receipt and processing by themselves. So some and or ors there in terms of what we included. Just the items of interest in terms of the specification. We looked at what we want to do with our mobile bins. In a lot of cases, the councils will ask the contractor to supply the bins and provide a detailed price list of bins, complete bin parts, and in a lot of cases, the cost to store, assemble and deliver those bins as part of the process. New commencements and also things like discontinueds, all of that has to be considered. In the LGP, we said that we have the right in the contract to use the local government procurement contract for the MPN 1.1, so mobile bin procurement, as well as providing prices as part of the contractor's own supplier. And the reason we did that was that we could compare what was going to be the best price for us in terms of best bin procurement, and also gave us the option of them as the contractor taking responsibility to then assemble, deliver for us. We had to consider the container deposit scheme, and at that stage we didn't have any real detail around the regulations, so it was a little bit of a, we don't know, let's deal with it when we know more information, so we had to have some flexibility around that. We had to put exclusions in there. You can see some of those. We wanted to exclude things like public place bin and illegal dumping, litter collection. That was already done through a separate contract with our cleansing guys. We had special conditions around Parramatta light rail. That's going to come right through the heart of Parramatta and affect a lot of high density areas around the Westmead and CBD of Parramatta. Not just residentials, but also commercial businesses. So we talked to City of Sydney about some of those impacts on them during the construction period, but also what to expect once it was operational and how we would deal with those impacts from a collections point of view. Block streets, road closures, temporary arrangements for collections, all that has to be considered. So we had to have a clause in there around that as well. And then we also had an education package. We wanted the contractor to provide 2 full-time FTEs as part of the package. They'd be staff of the contractor, sit with the contractor and work closely with us on education and contamination. And so they could either provide a price for that or build that into the lift price. So the tender assessment went from December, yes, over Christmas, but we did allow a little bit more time to give people at least that 3 months or 12-week period. The thing that was tight was the contract commencement. So we had around a 6-7 month period between awarding the tender in April and commencing November, which made it really tight for truck procurement. So that's not probably the ultimate time, but we did manage to get the trucks out and on the road thanks to the good work of the contractor that was engaged. But yeah, really need to consider timeframes and allow plenty of time for that. We had a tender assessment panel that had credibility. We had directors. We had a chief financial officer who knew the numbers, who was a whiz with Excel, which really helped. Had people like myself who were familiar with the operations and experts in terms of providing that advice. But we also had specialist advisors. We engaged probity advisor, Adams Consulting in this case, who documented all the probity and made sure that there was integrity in the process. We had technical advice on call through Impact Environmental, and they were on a specific as-needs basis. And we also had corporate scorecard do a lot of the financial checks at the end of those that were shortlisted. We had a number of tender submissions. You can see there, I won't go through them, but the usual culprits, some of them submitted one or multiple. But we had 23 possible combinations of collection versus processing, and also we had the clean-up options, 4 different clean-up options across scheduled and pre-booked, and the hybrid of 2 and 2 for... When you considered the clean-up, we had up to 92 combinations that we had to look at financially, so it did get quite complex. Assessment criteria, I think you must be all familiar with that. In this case, we had a price of 50%. Now, there was, because we were going through a process of administration, there was a big call about showing the benefits of amalgamation and showing a cost saving. So there was some pressure to put the price that high. In the previous tender, we had it around 35%. So 50% is on the higher side, but there was some pressure to demonstrate cost savings as a result of amalgamation. So there was some political pressure that you need to consider as well, and I think the previous speaker, Tony, talked about some of that. Obviously, there's an order of assessment in terms of doing the non-price first, not looking at any of the price at all until it's secondary, and then going through that price and having a rigid theoretical way of doing it with a formula looking at a variation from the average. And that's just an example screenshot of how that one particular option looked, where we looked at number of collections done by, in this case, Suez, with a Visi for processing and a Suez for organics. We also included what educational cost benefit was there and what sort of bin rollout and repair annually would it cost to us, knowing that the forecast. Nearly finished. Referee checks were critical, and certainly the final report to council. Tender outcomes, in this case, Suez were awarded the main contract. It was actually a 7-year contract. It was one of the non-conforming ones they proposed, which had a combined processing of green waste as well. Visi was successful with the receipt and processing of the yellow bin. That's the current contract arrangements today, which summarises that. A lot of pre-commencement planning. What I might do is skip through a lot of that, and you can look at that at your own will, but I just wanted to run through the last slide. Lessons learned. Be generous with the time frame. I know we're all pretty tight with the time that we have, but make sure that, because it does take a lot longer than you think. Consult with the community and stakeholders prior, get their input and build that into the specification. Make sure you have good internal procurement and tender processes. It really helps. If you haven't, get onto that and make sure that you do put that in place. Utilise existing templates. The industry knows them, as Tony said previously. You can tweak them or modify them to suit you, but basically try and keep them the same. Panel credibility is important, the assessment panel I'm talking about. Engage expert advice as you need it. Communications are critical, not just internally and letting the councillors, or in this case the administrator, know where we're up to, but also externally letting community know where we're up to and what the time frame is. Beware of the quality of data and reliability of that. The council information that we got from those former councils was varied in its quality. Some of it was quite detailed about what services and number of bins, others was really disparate. So it made it really hard for us, and we had to put disclaimers in the spec about this is what we think it is, but in the first 6 months we can agree to what that new baseline is in based on lift counts and based on auditing of some of these areas we're not familiar with. Secure temporary resources to manage some of the challenges, either side. So when you're finishing up a contract with one contractor, make sure that you've got resources there to back them up, particularly if there is issues around drivers and shortages. But also make sure when the contract commences, you might have additional admin staff to take calls to help with inquiries, particularly if there's changes involved with bin days, like there was in our case. and those new residents had to get used to those changes. And the relationship with the contractor finally is critical. There has to be that mutual respect. Communication is really essential, more frequent at the start and keep it ongoing. And make sure the expectations are known between the parties, particularly that will give you that service performance that, you know, is what the customer, the resident expects. Thank you.